Hi, everyone. We'll wait a few minutes before getting started just so more people have the opportunity to join us. Thanks for joining us today. I'm still convinced that we need uh, music to start this webinar while we're waiting for others, but I keep on saying that and I don't do anything about it. But we'll wait like 30 more seconds to let others join. All right, let's just get started. I hate making you guys wait. Thanks everyone for joining, especially during quarter end. I know it's an incredibly busy time, so hopefully I don't use up too much of your time today and that it's a good webinar. I typically talk about like quarter end related things during this time, which I won't do today. But if anyone has any general questions or wants me to go over quickly what I usually talk about at quarter end, meaning like checklists generally. If you guys have been attending, I've talked about it a few times. If you guys have any questions related to quarter end or any general questions, of course, ask those, put that in the Q&A or chat section, excuse me, and we'll make sure to go over that today. What we'll talk about was there was a recent Finlee release that maybe you encountered the change that we made, and I just wanted to kind of generally talk about releases, where the release notes go, and what we released last time, because there will be some releases in the near future. So we have some exciting stuff coming up. So nothing that I'll talk about specifically today, but I wanted to kind of mention where you see those release notes and what the change was that we had last month in a release. But the main topic for today is going to be best practices in client funds reconciliation. Webinars a couple times ago, I did something very general about best practices, but I have a more targeted topic to talk about today that I wanted to go over. So for releases, I'll hop into Finlee really quick and then go back to my webinar. But just as a reminder, any release that we have, you should get an email saying that there's been release notes released just from the same email that you get these webinar notifications on. And you can see all release notes if you go to the Help and Support Center, Finlee documentation, and then in the What's New section under the most recent version there, excuse me, geez. So the last release, it was really just a small scope of items that affected this module, but it was something that you guys probably see on a daily basis. And we did remove the default sort from the search ledger. So if we go to task and then search ledger, what you'll notice is that on the default results that come up, it's no longer filtered by date. The only reason that we did that is so that especially larger tenants where you have a lot more history and larger sets of data, that you'll see faster load times here. But I did want to mention that you can sort by any of these fields just simply by hitting the columns there. So we are trying to make the search ledger a little bit faster and more interactive. So there will be some updates kind of regarding the load times there. And we did a first step of making that a bit faster by removing that default sort there. So if you're used to seeing the sort by date and something changed a little bit, that's why. But you just simply go ahead and hit that column to sort that data by whatever column header you want to sort that by. So I just wanted to mention that change and that look out for release notes in the future to give you a detail of what we've released. And we have some cool features that are coming up there. As always, if there's some type of feature you would like to see or some type of change you would like to see in Finlee, we are always taking recommendations of how to optimize the system for you all. And any suggestions that you have, please send them over because you guys are actively using the system. We have internal users that are doing that as well, but we want to make sure that this is always evolving to make it more efficient for you to complete your daily tasks. So if there's something that would be nice to have or some type of functionality that you need a little bit more training on, something like that, or you think can change, always give us that feedback. We're always open to adjusting or optimizing the system there for you. So hopping back into our PowerPoint here to go over our main topic, I wanted to talk about kind of best practices in client funds reconciliation. Just a really big picture of the scope and importance of client funds reconciliation. It's not to pat ourselves on the back, although, not bad to do, especially during a low morale time like quarter end here, where you all are really busy. But client funds reconciliation in general can really, and having a good practice and ethical practice around it is really important for your entire organization. So I wanted to go over just some thoughts that I had about best practices and client funds reconciliation. Maybe to, pat yourself on the back saying, hey, we do all of these things, or maybe it will kind of stimulate some thoughts around maybe there's some improvement around your practices and internal audits or documentation around like your daily process for a client funds reconciliation. So I'll stop rambling there, but the first topic that I want to talk about in regards to this topic is defining client funds reconciliation. It's important to define what the scope of this is, and there is some kind of detail about this that I want to go over. My words are not coming out as good as they usually do, so let's see if I can get it together here. But defining client funds reconciliation is really as simple as any funds that you initiate on behalf of your customers. But why I wanted to highlight that is I would consider in Finlee, if you are reconciling all funds that you're initiating on behalf of customers. So some of you have maybe just your tax account that you're reconciling within Finlee. And if those are the only client funds that you initiate on behalf of customers, then you are reconciling all client funds. But if you have any benefits, third-party agency, trust checks, direct deposits that you even float in and out of your account, then I would consider, if you're not currently reconciling all of those. Anytime you initiate any funds on behalf of a customer, because you're the originator, you have some liability attached to that movement of those funds. And because you've engaged in, agreements with your bank, with the customer that you're initiating funds on behalf of, there's some type of tracking that should be happening with those funds, even if something as simple as deposits were just going in and out, you feel it isn't necessary to reconcile. There's always exceptions or operational changes that can impact the validity of those reconciliations. So I do recommend setting the scope of your client funds reconciliation to include all client funds. And kind of underlying that too is that your account should only contain client funds that you're reconciling. So we'll talk about that in a later slide, but I don't generally recommend commingling like operational funds with taxes or different types of funds there. So defining and understanding that, hey, I'm on a daily basis reconciling all funds that I'm holding on behalf of all customers, even if you've gone into agreement with a certain set of customers that they wanted a separate account. And so, hey, I only have 5 accounts on that bank account. I don't feel that it's necessary to reconcile those. I would argue that any account that holds any type of customer funds should be included in the scope of client funds. And then underlying that too, client funds reconciliation, and the whole point of it is to define funds by customer by ledger. I didn't have a good way of phrasing that, but what I mean by that is that when you're reconciling on a daily basis, you should be able to constitute what makes up that balance that you're reconciling, which we already do within ledger reconciliation reports there, but it's really important to make sure that you can allocate out the money in each bank account to a certain customer there. If there's a set of funds like within a bank account that are related to non-customers there, and you have it allocated to a ledger that's a non-customer account, there should be some justification for why that exists. And we'll go a little bit more into that into another slide as well. But I almost think about it like you're earmarking that money for that customer by defining it by that customer ledger there. And it's really important, like, earmarking means that those funds are designated for that specific purpose, right? And if we're earmarking it for that customer, I know that I've collected $500 for company ABC, and I may have $5 million in that account, but I know definitively that $500 is designated for any funds that I make or any payments that I make on behalf of that customer, and really taking that seriously, that $500 is used for that specific purpose, even though sometimes it feels like a little bit, maybe not the right term to use, but like a slush fund, like it feels like that $5 million I have to make payments in general. Well, really, that $5 million is comprised of all of these individual collections by customer that's already allocated out there. So completing subledger reconciliation on a daily basis to make sure that every customer is in balance, and understanding and kind of looking at the perspective of these accounts of like, hey, that $500 cannot be used for any other purpose but for that customer, is really important aspect to defining client funds. I would almost even imagine it like, hey, I, in essence, have, if I have 700 customers, even though I have one bank account, I have, in essence, 700 different accounts that have earmarked amounts that I can only pay for them. Because what that prevents against is you thinking that you can use those funds for other purposes there. And because they're like one tax account for all of your tax payments, I think we don't tend to think about those bank accounts as individual ledgers. We tend to think of it as a whole. Like, hey, I have $5 million and I have $4.5 million of tax payments to make, on my Wednesday deposit. So I technically have enough. Well, it's not really valid to think about it in that way. Is the $4.5 million that I'm making, do I have that, like, is that liability correct based on each customer that I'm paying out? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but I'll go a little bit more into detail going into the next slide, or 2 slides here. It's important to think about like why tracking client funds matters. Yes, we have a fiduciary responsibility. There's legal and ethical implications of mishandling client funds, and there's risk aversion, which I'll talk about all of those there. But let's take a step back. I've been in the service bureau industry basically for 12 years now. I started in 2013, and when I started, like, when it was my responsibility to be head of accounting and tax department, you go in, we were like at the service bureau that I was at, we technically had someone else take care of all of our like ACH initiations, but then we took that on ourselves and did a software conversion, which some of you have gone through, which is always fun, right? And when I was responsible for the accounting and tax department of like 1,200 customers, when you're looking at that many numbers and you're initiating, 1.5, $2.5 million tax payments, it seems like, and maybe this is not for you, which is great, but for me, sometimes it felt a little bit like monopoly money. And I had to take a step back and realize the real world financial implications of the money I was moving on behalf of customers, and that this has real real implications. It's not only with client funds, of course, it's paying employees their direct deposits, but you're also responsible for, and you all know this, but you're responsible for paying tax agencies appropriately, third party appropriately, and all of that money movement actually really, really matters. And you have agreements that you've gone into with not only your customer, but your financial institution. And just like NACHA regulations when you're the originator of a lot of ACH transactions there. So your fiduciary responsibility, I would, and maybe this is a good time, maybe not a good time, especially because it's quarter end, but I would maybe in your organization look at your agreements that you've gone into, not only with your bank, which is important, like the regulations and requirements that they have on you for risk aversion, right? But also look at the ACH agreements that you go into with your customers and then the POAs that you have on file with them that are required for NACHA regulation there. Because you're the originator of these transactions, there is an underlying responsibility that you have that you're signing off every day. Maybe you're not the accounting team and responsible for doing this, but when you're doing client funds reconciliation, you're basically validating that's what is happening is valid. So there's kind of an underlying responsibility there, but it's important to take seriously you stamping on a daily basis that everything is happening appropriately. There are legal and ethical implications of mishandling client funds there that I don't think we think about on a daily basis. This is not to scare you all, but for me, I had to constantly remind myself, and this is just kind of exposing myself here, that when I was responsible for, moving all of that money, that I would get into the mindset a little bit that it was monopoly money until there was an issue there. But what I was saying every time that I was approving ACH is that, to the best of my knowledge, operationally, our practices lead to low risk on those types of transactions, and that what I'm sending is accurate. So client funds reconciliation is the underlying practice that makes that valid, and the responsibility of you as of you doing the reconciliation on a daily basis is saying, hey, nothing operationally is going wrong or has changed. There's also factors of wherever you process your taxes or your ACH files, maybe there was a recent software update or an update on how tax payments are created. And I'm validating that everything that I'm sending is still accurate based on the most recent changes of the software. So just because something hasn't gone wrong before doesn't mean that it can't go wrong in the future. I'm just this is not a scare tactic. It's just more underlining the importance of it. And also, like, we have to take into consideration that we have to check that what we're doing, even practices maybe that we've held for a while, are ethical. And what I mean by that, because, and talking about the earmarking that I was talking about a little bit earlier, I don't like to think about these mutual accounts as money that I'm holding, right? Of $5 million, let's say that you have in your tax account. It's not just $5 million that you're holding individual amounts for 1,200 customers. And you need to think about it in the way of, if I've collected $500 from company ABC, I am legally obligated to pay out that $500. Meaning that if for company DEF, if you failed to collect a tax payment that you've made on their behalf, so let's say that you paid out $1,200 for them, and you fail to collect that back timely, you're technically using other customers' funds to cover that outage there. So yes, you may have $5 million in the account, but that $1,200 is coming from somewhere, right? Historically, that's coming from funds that you've collected from other customers. So it's my recommendation that you have an ethical responsibility to to either have a set time where you collect those funds back, or you temporarily cover that outage so that you're not using other clients' funds to do that. And that may be a little bit shocking of a statement, but if you, maybe not shocking, but I think it's really important to consider what ethical responsibility you have to your customers and create a high standard for the way that you cover outages. So let's say that you guys are changing softwares, or there's some factor where you're completely closing out all of your bank accounts tomorrow. Not going out of business, anything like that, but like let's say that you're closing out, or you're not taking the responsibility of initiating any transactions on behalf of customers starting tomorrow. You guys are stopping everything today. If you paid out all of your responsibilities for every single customer of client funds that you were holding, and you were out for that customer DEF, right, $1,200, and let's say that's the only outage that you have, which would be awesome, right? Then your account would be in the negative of $1,200, and you'd be responsible for covering that $1,200 to make your account and put it back to zero. So to me, there's not a difference between that scenario of like, hey, like I have to close everything out and pay out everything. There's not a difference between that situation and you continuing to use that bank account, because on a daily basis, I'm still responsible for making sure that I'm not out any money there. So I work with a lot of different service bureaus, and we all have different policies. You guys all have different policies on how you cover outages or holding too much money, but especially outages there. I'm not saying that, either way isn't good, but if you have outages, how I think about it is that you're technically using other clients' funds to cover those outages. So to me, it's reasonable then to move operational money temporarily, or to have a policy to collect as soon as possible from the customer that outage. So that takes vigilant subledger reconciliation, which, for risk aversion, kind of moving on to that one, the only true risk aversion and client funds reconciliation is to, on a daily basis, do full reconciliation. That includes bank reconciliation, ledger, and subledger reconciliation there. So subledger reconciliation, including reviewing any outstanding that are reported on the Kanban board, as well as addressing any new items there. So your Kanban board being up to date, tracking, using due dates, understanding all of your outages is really vital for risk aversion, because you're not reconciled. Jennifer always says that, but she's saying you're not fully reconciled until you're 100% reconciled. And that's absolutely true, because, you could have an overall difference of $10, right? Like let's say that your overall variance on your tax account, which would be amazing, right? Well, it is $10. That $10 can be misleading if you look at an overall difference. So, and I guess I should have used visuals in this, but hopefully my words are enough for this. Let's say that you're comparing, hey, I have, as of yesterday, I have $5 million in my account, and I see that I have $5 million and $10 of liability to pay out in the future. So, hey, I only have, if I look overall, I have $5 million, I have $5 million and $10 of liability. I'm in a really good place because I'm only $10 over, right? If I'm looking globally at the total amounts, then that doesn't look too bad, but it's only by comparing each customer that make up that $5 million that you could see the net, like the actual difference, because the net difference may be $10, but that could be $100,000 that you're holding in customers that are over, and then $110, and then under $100,000, right? So your net impact could be $200,000 and $10. I said it in a weird way, but like the net difference, like you don't know unless like your customer balances are at zero, that there isn't some net difference that doesn't look like a big implication. but could be a huge implication. So if you're over on a lot of ledgers and then under on some, it's not that those kind of wash each other, especially if they're different customers and not related at all. It's that you have a responsibility to refund those customers and then collect from the others. So your overall impact could look like it's off by $10. That's why comparing on a global level doesn't really work. But your overall impact could be $200,000 plus that $10 that you're off, right? So the net impact is not really a big indicator, because some people can close their old accounts and say, hey, I only had to cover $10,000 that were out, right? So that must mean I was pretty close historically on that bank account. That's not an indicator to me at all of it. Like, it could be $1,000, it could be $10,000, $100,000, but that doesn't show the entire story, because it could be that you were over collecting on a set of customers and under collecting. So the net difference and variances are actually much larger than that. So you're not fully reconciled until you're 100% reconciled. It's not fun. It's not a fun fact about life, but unfortunately, that's the case. And that's the biggest way to have the most impact for risk aversion. You know, client funds reconciliation is probably your most vital daily process. I mean, of course, sending out ACH files, processing payrolls, which is the root of everything that your organization does, is important. But as far as risk, doing reconciliation on a daily basis is absolutely vital. There's a reason, a lot of us are former service bureau people that do this, because we really do believe in its importance. And as softwares evolve or get upgraded, or tax payment processes change, as there's regulation coming down the pipeline, which, there definitely could be, and we talk about FBO accounts with some customers, all of that, like this, having a solid process here and making sure and kind of checking in with yourself that this is a solid legal and ethical process is going to save your company a lot of risk and liability in the future. So I can't understate enough how important your guys' role is, and on a daily basis, looking at things too, kind of with fresh eyes on a daily basis, because I'm guilty of this too. I think we tend to look at variances with the lens of what's occurred before. And what's hard about reconciliation in general, and hard about your guys' job, and now I'm just rambling, but sorry, is that, that like things can change, and operationally someone can make mistakes. And what you're looking at in subledger reconciliation is 100% of the things that have gone wrong. Now, it may be 1 to 2% of your overall transactions and customers are reporting errors, but because of how subledger reconciliation works, which is just showing you everything that's out of balance, we tend to only see the things that are going wrong. And of course, over time, you'll find trends of things, but hopefully you're fixing operationally the trends of what's happening or adjusting your processes. And then inherently, you're seeing everything that's difficult to research, because, it tends to be everything that's going wrong or operational practices that are failing. But it's important to fully flesh those out and take the time to kind of look at each item with a fresh eye, and just not assume that it's something that's happened before, or assume that it will go away. So we just don't want to make those assumptions while going through reconciliation. The last item that I want to talk about, because I didn't want to take too much of your guys' time today, especially during quarter end, but again, if there's any general questions related to quarter end, or any questions of what I'm going over, then feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time here at the end. But the recommended best practices, and kind of things that I just wanted to say very broadly here, is that we don't recommend commingling of funds. So what I mean by that is that generally, I do think that taxes should be completely separate from any other types of funds, just because the nature of the future liabilities that you have to pay on behalf of customers. But also, I already mentioned it before, but there should be no client funds accounts with non-client funds in them. That's my recommendation. It's just that like uniquely tracking what you're responsible for paying out on behalf of customers should be a separate process from like your operation account where you're impounding. That can be different than like your billing account, right? Like maybe if you want to track that you've collected all invoicing and you have a unique billing account, that's totally fine. And that's part of client funds reconciliation. But operational account where you're paying out bills, things like that, I generally recommend that that's completely separate there. There's a justification for separating out like trust checks, like bank accounts versus third-party agency, like benefits, workers' comp, things like that. But I mean, that's a little bit more at your discretion, but I definitely recommend, and there's always new customers coming on saying, hey, like this is how our bank accounts are set up. And I generally, if there's taxes and some other type of funds, it's my strong recommendation that you separate out those accounts because the tracking of tax funds is hard anyways. Might as well not make it harder than it needs to be. Then I kind of already highlighted this, but timely collecting or refunding funds, resolving subledger reconciliation when it has a monetary impact, like is probably the most important thing that you do when it comes to reconciliation and subledger reconciliation on a daily basis. Because it's my thought, and maybe this is a high standard, but I'd rather, set it at the standard so that we could try to meet it. It's my thought that every single day that you're out for a customer, you're technically using other customer funds to cover that outage. And put yourself in the perspective of that customer. Like say that you were the customer, that's your $10,000 that they took from you. Like you would want that earmarked for your own like liability that they're paying out on your behalf. And I think that's not an unreasonable ask from a customer. And maybe it's an assumption of customers that you are specifically earmarking those funds, which if you're using any, this kind of goes into the third point, which is use of funds. If you're using client funds for any like corporate interest, like then I think that's an unethical use of funds. So like, let's say, I'm not talking about sweep accounts, that's a little bit different. But like, sweeping out, you still are holding those funds specifically earmarked for tax payments. It just gets moved in and out and then, interest accrues on it. But let's say that you are using funds to cover something operationally, or even if you're commingling like your tax funds with your operational like billing, like and you're paying out billing and you're not appropriately moving and pre-funding those bills, then technically you're using customer funds to pay your bills. And I to my core believe that that's an unethical process or practice. So we have a responsibility as people that go into an ACH agreement, go into POA agreements with customers that have agreements with the bank and third-party agencies, that we are ethically using and earmarking these funds on behalf of customers. So I sound a little serious today, but it is a serious thing to just on a daily basis like look at your own internal practices and adjust them accordingly. And I think the biggest ask here is, making sure that we timely collect or refund. We work with a lot of customers where it's their practice, at the end of the quarter to make those adjustments there. I think that's perfectly fine. But if you know that you're out $15,000 net there, if you don't go back to the customer for, like maybe the customer doesn't want to be bothered, and you think that's easier to do that at quarter end, then I would seriously consider moving that $15,000 from like an operations fund to temporarily like hold that money there while you're waiting to collect it if you have some type of process there. This all underlying too, if you guys have like a SOC audit and compliance. And I would maybe look at your internal audits to make sure that your client fund reconciliation follow that same practice as well. There's just, a lot of stories out there about the misappropriation of funds. And we have a responsibility to our customers to ethically handle their funds. And if I was a customer, I would love to make sure that the money that was collected on behalf of me was specifically used for the payments that my organization is responsible ultimately for making. So that's kind of my argument there today. That's really all I had for today. Hopefully that is not like a scary thing. It's more of like, hey, maybe I need to check or take another look at my daily processes just to have a high standard and try to ethically and more legally be sound and make sure that we are responsible with the funds that the clients trust us with. So that is it for me today. I will stick around and see if you guys have any questions. And if you guys have any specific questions, about maybe a practice that you guys have or something operationally that you're seeing that you have a question on, or does that not fit like my responsibility with client funds reconciliation, always feel free to reach out to us. And we're happy to hop on a call with you and try to leverage our experience to help you out as always. So I really appreciate you guys hopping on, especially at this time of quarter end. Hope quarter end goes well for you all. You guys will make it. You've made it before. You can make it again. Yeah, let us know if you all need anything. Thanks so much. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Autumn. Thanks, Jolene. Thanks, Maggie. Nice to see you guys. Thanks.